Yes, welcome everybody. Cannabis News. I'm your host, Joe Klare. It's April 10th, 2019. The show, as always, is presented by the Marijuana Times. Check us out at marijuanatimes.org. Get the swag at makecannabisgreatagain.com. All of those places, our social media, all that stuff. Go check it out. A bunch of great articles at marijuanatimes.org as well. Today we're talking about the differences between cigarettes and marijuana. Also a story about Snoop Dogg. Rather obvious story about Snoop Dogg, but I guess some people didn't think it was so obvious. Also, a look at Ontario's first week of retail sales up in Canada. All of that coming up. But first, of course, Cannabis News is brought to you by Natureside. Nature-side.com and their organic, all-natural pesticides. Grow safe and poison-free. Don't put harmful chemicals on what you are growing. Don't use banned pesticides. What you want to do is go to Natureside, nature-side.com. And check out their organic, all-natural pesticides. They are awesome, not just for being a sponsor, of course, of this show, but for many other reasons as well. Natureside, nature-side.com. Go check them out, a proud sponsor of Cannabis News. This first story by yours truly at marijuanatimes.org. The vast differences between smoking marijuana and smoking cigarettes. Now, to a lot of you who are reading this or reading this story or watching this show, it seems rather obvious. Like, it seems like an obvious subject that there are differences between smoking marijuana and smoking cigarettes. But there's a reason I wrote this article. Well, there's a few reasons, actually. The main one is that if it's easy for someone like me, I've been immersed in the cannabis community and in news surrounding the community and the industry for the last 10 years. Many of you watch shows like this, you listen to other podcasts, you read articles, various websites, whatever. You're immersed in this. You know things about marijuana that a lot of people don't. You use marijuana, you've done research, you know what's going on. But it's easy for us, from the perspective that we have, to forget that a lot of people aren't like that. A lot of people, like if you go back, for instance, take a time machine and go back and talk to a 10-year-old me, and ask me what the differences are between marijuana and cigarettes, and which is worse for you, smoking marijuana or smoking cigarettes, 10-year-old me would have told you unequivocally that smoking a joint is much worse than smoking a cigarette. As I mentioned in the article, I was told a million times, smoking one joint is like smoking 20 cigarettes. It's like smoking a pack of cigarettes. There's no follow-up. There's no, this is why. It was just, that's the way it was. And you have to realize there are a lot of people that still think that. I was on a podcast a couple years ago. This guy named Dean Andrews, and we were talking about marijuana, and he was flabbergasted by two things that I said, and I had to send him the research behind it, because he's like, oh wow, that's amazing, I didn't know that. One is that smoking marijuana doesn't cause lung cancer, and two, marijuana use doesn't kill brain cells. He thought the opposite on both those things. And I was like, no, I know we were told growing up. I know a lot of kids are told growing up. It's a lot of propaganda that has no basis in reality. To say that smoking a joint's worse than smoking a cigarette has no basis in reality, and yet there's still a lot of people who believe that, because back in the day, you rewind 30 years ago, most people believe that. And there's still a lot left. That's why if someone like Kevin Sabet starts to equate, big tobacco with big weed, a certain portion of the population listens and believes him, and that's important because their vote is just as important, just as valuable as the vote of someone who's actually looked into the issue and knows what they're talking about. And their vote counts just as much as mine. I've done over 370 of these shows. I know a lot about marijuana. But my vote is one, just the same as some moron who saw Kevin Sabet on MSNBC and said, oh, well, marijuana's bad, okay, I'm going to go vote against it. So that's why it's important to kind of see the perspective of people who don't know what we know, and not to assume that they know these things, but to assume that they may not. Maybe if we get the information out there and make it available to them, then they will know. This next story, a little bit of lighter fare from the world of entertainment. Snoop Dogg stinks up green room with weed at movie premiere. This is from page6.com, the gossip section of the New York Post. Snoop Dogg gave new meaning to green room at ArcLight Hollywood Cinema during a premiere for the rapper's latest pot-friendly film, The Beach Bum. After the screening, we hear that a message was sent from the theater to premiere organizers regarding a few issues with the movie's talent, which sources say were in reference to the weed-loving LA rapper. Apparently, Snoop smoked a lot of weed in the green room. They had a lot of trouble getting the smoke and the smell out. I mean, I get it. It is their, is their property. I mean, if they had told him beforehand not to smoke marijuana, and then he did, maybe that would be a thing. But I don't think they can say that they weren't aware that he was probably going to smoke some marijuana. And that, in the absence, even with explicit prohibition of him smoking marijuana in that room, he still might have done it. But to expect him not to smoke marijuana if he didn't get that warning or whatever, that's ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry. Again, I'm a very property rights type of guy, but you have to anticipate some things. And if you don't go up to Snoop Dogg and say, man, if you really just do us a solid and not smoke a ton of weed in this room, that would be great. If they didn't do that, then I don't know. They have no complaint. You have to assume, in the absence of that Snoop Dogg was going to smoke some weed. Snoop Dogg's known for a couple things. One is rapping. The other is weed. He smokes a lot of weed. You ever seen Snoop Dogg? You ever seen him talk? You ever seen him, a video of him? If you listen to one of his songs, he smokes a lot of weed. It's not something he hides. Snoop Dogg there's never a time I think that Snoop Dogg was in the cannabis closet. He's been out. He's been out and proud for many decades now. So, if they weren't expecting that, well, that is a failure of imagination, to be sure. Really not even imagination, just to anticipate a normal thing. Whatever. It is what it is. It's the next story. This last story. Out of Canada, highs and lows. Ontario's first week of cannabis retail. Business got off to a roaring start. A lot of the stores, 9 stores opened for business on April 1st in Ontario. The government designated date. One opened 6 days later. The stores drew long lines of cannabis enthusiasts and curiosity seekers. Some people stood in line for hours. And at least one went further. Karyama Saeed set up a pup tent outside the Honey Pot in downtown Toronto almost 24 hours before the store opened its doors Monday morning. This is a great sentence. He set up a pup tent outside the Honey Pot. I don't know, as a writer, this really satisfying for some reason. Said, quote, "Someone had to be the first in line, so why not me? My office is just down the street, and I do have a professional interest in what's going on here," said a lawyer who specializes in cases where cannabis issues intersect with criminal law and landlord-tenant law, told Leafly, quote, "It's a historic moment. I haven't been able to purchase cannabis from the Ontario Cannabis Store website, which launched in October, because I have a Visa debit card and it doesn't work on the site. I'm also mindful," she added. I'm sorry, that's a she. Why did I assume it was a he? I think I did. That's my bad. Karima. That sounds like a woman's name. In any case, it's a she. My bad. "I'm also mindful of people who don't have fixed addresses or don't have computer literacy, also haven't been able to purchase cannabis online, and they're some of our most vulnerable community members." The Honey Pot was the only cannabis store to open in Toronto on April 1st, was jammed with customers for the next 4 days. In London, Ontario, around 60 people lined up outside Central Cannabis before it opened its doors for the first time. A customer named Jason Geldof was at the head of the queue. He drove from Goderic, Ontario, which is 100 kilometers away. When he left the store, he held up his receipt for all to see. "It's nothing to be ashamed of," he said. "I think we can bring it out into the public eye. It's clean. We're all respectable people. We're all adults." I mean, it really sums it up quite nicely. We're all adults. We want to go to a store and buy some marijuana, and another adult wants to sell it to us. It's nobody's business. It really isn't. You can give me the speeches about society and blah, 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 and I'll tell you, I can make all those arguments about shutting down McDonald's. But at a certain point, adults interacting with other adults have to make decisions, as long as they're not infringing on the rights of anyone else, about their own lives. It has to be a bedrock of what we're doing here, and increasingly it's not. And that's more dangerous than anything else I can think of. We'll continue to cover all these stories and more here on Cannabis News. 5 days a week, marijuanatimes.org. Click that video tab, search Apple Podcasts for the Marijuana Times to find the audio-only version of the show. Thank you for watching and listening today. And see you all next time right here on Cannabis News.